Hello and welcome to the new episode of the All Walks of Life podcast. In today's episode, I sat down with my close friend Rishit Jain and we spoke about topics such as environmental sustainability and how his organization REUSE Orbis is trying to tackle that on a global level when it comes to matters such as e-waste. We also talked about how young individuals in high school or at university can take the step into launching their organizations and shouldn't be scared of doing so. Lastly, we also talked about the implications of the whole COVID situation on an economic front and how it would play out at different economies around the world. We also this was because Rishit's an economics major at Cambridge, and that's a big passion of his. And I've also been intrigued by this whole situation regarding the COVID situation and how it would play out for different economies. So that was a great conversation that we had. And lastly, if you like what you're watching, then do consider subscribing to the YouTube channel or just simply following me on Instagram at @ishan_. Thank you and do enjoy the podcast. The coronavirus situation is the pandemic is affecting us all. How have you been keeping yourself busy in this time?
Well, the university has given a bunch of work, so there's that to complete. But beyond that, I mean, there's obviously REUSE Orbis, which is a social enterprise I've been working on for quite some time. So I've been keeping myself busy there, and I'm even kickstarting my second venture in like a week or so. So it's quite exciting.
That all sounds really great. I mean, so my plan with this conversation is that I actually want to break it down into 3 segments. So I want to talk about your student life because I've been with you as a classmate since grade 7, and I've always seen you do really well in academics. So maybe I kind of want to explore that side of yours and how you basically went about in your academic life. The second is how you went about starting your organization, and just put some points out for young people who'd be watching this program and how they may just take inspiration from you to start things off. And lastly, about your economic side. So I know you're an economics major at Cambridge. So just how the pandemic may affect us on an economic situation. Obviously, I understand that these may be a little difficult to get into, but even though if we just have a conversation, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to come up with some things. So yeah, man, let me know about your academic life. Like how were you so good since grade 7? At least that's when I've known you from.
Man, I don't know. It's like, I think it's just about like the amount of work you put into it, but at the same time trying to make it enjoyable, right? Like, I wouldn't say there's like a secret formula to it, but if you have objectives in mind, attainable objectives, and you continuously work towards achieving those, then you have this sense of satisfaction every time you tick a box. And I think it's just about not looking at going from 0 to 100, but looking at going from 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and so on. Because that way, then you constantly feel satisfied by what it is that you're working on, right? It's not like you have to make like an enormous jump immediately. So I think there's that. But secondly, fortunately enough, I was able to make a decision about my interest in economics at a very early age. Like, I think there was a book fair in school in the 7th grade where I picked up a book by Paul Krugman, who is a very popular economist. And that sort of like was the nail in the coffin for me. It was like, oh, I absolutely love this and I really want to know more about it. And as a result, I was just naturally so inclined to learn more and understand more about economics in general, that I think it helped me gain a lot of insight and just enhance, let's say, a lot of skills that are universal. Let's say your research skills, your ability to read quickly, comprehend quickly, and hopefully, I'm assuming hopefully maybe that helped out.
That's pretty interesting because I feel that it's very difficult for some individuals to actually find their niche, find something they're actually good at. And if you're saying that you actually found your love for economics at such a young age, I feel that's crucial because I wouldn't say there's a right time to find what you're actually good at. I think it can happen anytime in life. It's just that for people to recognize that and make the most of it, because I see so many individuals working 9 to 5 in industries that they're probably just doing it for the money. But I feel that if they actually make the jump into another industry that they feel that their best interests lie in, I think that's going to be really powerful. So is there a way that an individual can actually find what they're good at, or is it just that you just keep exploring different subject areas and whatever clicks?
Okay, so yeah, like I was saying, I think what's of the greatest importance isn't like going through a particular book or learning like one part of math that will just make you like Einstein. But the idea is that I think what's most important is discipline. And I know it sounds cliche, but the fact is that if you have the discipline to really work hard towards whatever it is you like, then it's only a matter of time after you find what it is you like, and then you're just such a machine at learning and working hard towards achieving that objective that it'll come naturally to you. So I wouldn't, I mean, especially in today's day, right? Because if you look at the people, some of the people who are the most successful people, they're not defined by their profession. They're kind of like a 21st century renaissance man, because an example I'd like to take, for example, is a YouTuber KSI, right? He started off as a digital entertainer, but today he's in music, he's in boxing, and he's not, he doesn't belong to a category. He's not a boxer, he's not a YouTuber, he's not a rapper, he's KSI. And I think because of the digital age, because of like the many opportunities available to us today, we live in a unique era where what's important isn't what you do, but who you are and how you can put who you are into any sphere, right? So that's why I think what's most important is to develop your personal brand and have these universal skills that you can put into multiple places.
There's this really interesting podcast I've been listening to. It's called Not Overthinking. So they talk about how people, if they actually want to get into just becoming an influencer or just getting your name out there, is simply getting yourself out there. It's writing that blog post that you may want to write. It's getting that YouTube video out. It's getting that collaboration done with that particular celebrity that you want to do that. It's just getting it done. That's the first step. However, as you said, cliche it might sound, that's what the foundations are to actually getting there, if that makes sense. And
No,
I feel.
absolutely. I think something that I say quite often, which is almost exactly what you've said now, is that if you want to do something, you got to go ahead and do it. And I think there's, at least when I was small, I had a misconception that I don't really have to work towards one particular thing. I just need to do well in whatever it is that comes my way, and eventually fate and destiny will sort of give me whatever I want. But that's not how it works. And you have a lot of geniuses who will be absolutely phenomenal at the little niche they work on, but they're not doing what makes them happy because they didn't work towards achieving that. So at least that's my 2 cents on that entire concept. Yeah, I agree with that quite strongly.
Wait, so
Quite strongly.
there was a phase when the great Rishit Jain believed in destiny. Actually, was that like a phase?
I'm not near that sort of title yet, but thank you. But as for Destiny, man, I think when you work hard, like it, and I'm pretty sure everyone feels that way, but when you work hard, you will sometimes feel like it's not paying off, that you're putting so many hours into this, you're just doing everything you possibly can, and you're still like where you were like before you put any effort. And I think that's when you need a very irrational belief in an external force, because that's the only thing that can keep you sort of going. And I think destiny for a lot of ambitious people is precisely that irrational force. It's that belief that something out there will ensure that all the effort I'm putting in now will culminate into my dreams eventually. So.
One thing I wanted to talk about, so you mentioned how when you took it for your academics or anything in life for working on a particular project, you took it like 10% at a time or 5% at a time, that you took it a step at a time. So for example, this is something I've been interested in. It's regarding study techniques and how you can actually self-actualization actually. So things such as just so there's this misconception of people actually doing a lot of handwritten notes, and that's actually not as great in terms of memory retention and things like that. So I just wanted to ask you if were there any particular study techniques you used back in the day to achieve those grades, or maybe even in your business life rather.
Well, to be fair, I'm still studying, so I do still apply those techniques. But I guess I don't know. It's not like I have this strategy to go ahead with. But what I do ensure is that I'm not mugging things up. So it's not like these are the points, and I just need to know of their existence so I can pen it down on a paper. And I think that strategy anyway is something that will only help you up until maybe 10th, because after that it's very important that you understand exactly what is being expected of your course and curriculum and what your syllabus is trying to tell you to answer the more difficult questions. So I think if you sort of ensure you're in the habit of understanding every facet of what you're learning from an early age, I think it's just helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this very powerful saying. So it said that if you actually understand a topic very well, or you understand a concept very well, you should be able to teach that to a 5-year-old. It seems very bizarre, but then if you can actually put that into layman's words for a 5-year-old to understand, then you're pretty well versed with that particular concept, and you can go well with it. I mean, I kind of observed it in my IB days as well. So I think I read this on some IB blog or something, but they said that to actually get good at IB, you should be happy when the exam day is there. And I actually felt that's a rubbish concept that can never happen, because there's always so much work. How can I be happy for a subject examination to arrive? But that actually happened
Right.
for me for a couple of exams. I think it was Spanish most notably. I felt that yes, this is pretty much I've covered most of the coursework, and I feel I'm pretty excited for the exam, however bizarre that might sound. I don't know if you
Yeah.
share similar insights, but I'm guessing you've got a 45, so maybe.
No, I'll be honest, I don't enjoy exams at all. I don't think they're very fair. But again, it's hard to come up with alternatives that are fair. So I don't know. I think I don't want to like criticize exams without being ready with like a proper alternative that could genuinely substitute that well, because exams are important, obviously, for a lot of reasons. But I personally don't enjoy them, and I do tend to get stressed. I do overthink my answers and absolutely trash them after my exams. So I don't think I'm the best exam taker. I've never identified as a good exam taker. I just think that hopefully the strategies that I've been taught and with my experience I've learned have just allowed me to answer questions well. But I don't think I'm good at taking exams.
Wait, so you touched upon this whole concept of taking exams and things like that. So I wanted to ask you, because you applied to some top American schools as well. I restricted myself to the UK because I wanted to work in the football industry. But when I
Right.
spoke to you, and when we did your what was it, US school exam reaction, sorry, your college reactions, I actually didn't know that how the selection process actually worked, and it was kind of an eye opener for me, because I felt that you'd be a pretty good candidate for any of those Ivy League schools. But then you said that it doesn't matter how good a candidate you are. It's kind of a jackpot when it comes to how many Asians or how many people apply to those top schools. So could you expand a little bit on that, and for the viewers?
And I mean, yeah, that is a contentious topic. I'd say a lot of scandals in recent history sort of highlight how, in a lot of ways, there are deficiencies in the admissions process. Now, I don't want to say anything too staunch, because at the end of the day, it's all opaque, right? And at the end of the day, any admissions process, any sort of application needs good luck. I don't want to comment too much on the way they work, but what I do want to say is that I do appreciate the American educational system in terms of their focus on extracurriculars. I would like to say that off the bat, it's extremely important. I think it's very valuable if universities instill a culture of going beyond your books and trying to actually do something with the learning you achieve, right? Because you may be, you know, like a machine, a computer in terms of what you know, but if you can't implement that, then your actual value to society is fairly limited. And I think that's obviously something really positive. But about the admissions process, I think it's opaque, and like any other institution, it has its deficiencies.
Do you feel there are more opportunities for things like entrepreneurship, or things such as just getting your name out there in US schools as compared to maybe schools in the UK or even back home in India?
But the thing is, the institution you get to only really matters to a certain extent, because there are two ways to looking at it, right? If, let's say, hypothetically, I say that USA has just incredible infrastructure for supporting student entrepreneurs, right? Let's say that's the case. Well, odds are then that that institute is going to have a good 100 entrepreneurs, student entrepreneurs who are cutthroat, who are incredibly talented, who are very experienced, and who probably know how to use those opportunities better than you do. compare that in this hypothetical scenario, the UK, where we were saying that they don't maybe have the best infrastructure to support student entrepreneurs. Well, what that really means for, let's say, someone like me is that then I know that there is a vacancy for someone like me, that the value I can add to a British ecosystem is far greater than what I can in an environment where there are already thousands of people just like me, if not far more talented. So it's really about being opportunistic and optimistic at the same time. I really think a lot of things happen for a good reason, and if they don't, then it's your duty to ensure that you made the best use of whatever opportunity you're in. And so, of course, like in the infrastructure existing is one part of it, but that doesn't mean that if you're not in the best place in the world, you can't make something of yourself. That's ludicrous.
So, talking about entrepreneurship, let's just move on to your organization then. So, if you could just let us know a little bit about reuse and just environmental sustainability as a whole. What do you make of environmental sustainability?
Sure. So, REUSE Orbis is an international youth-led social enterprise. We work on electronic waste management as well as social entrepreneurship, and we've had units across India, China, USA, the UK, France, and Canada, and we're actively expanding that ecosystem. And we've had the honor of partnering with governmental organizations, companies, banks, schools, universities, residential societies, just a very vast ecosystem, I'd say, and it's been a great journey. And yeah, so that's what we sort of work on. Now, in terms of my opinions on sustainability, well, I think really it makes the most sense for me to comment about e-waste, given that that is what I work on. But I think I refer to e-waste as the monster under the 21st century's bed. And essentially what I mean by that is the fact that you're seeing faster and faster cycles of innovation and consumerism. The next model of the iPhone comes out every year, and everybody's, waiting in anticipation for the next model of whatever phone they're on, but they're not really thinking about what's going to happen to that previous model of the phone that they're definitely discarding. And I think in the 21st century, it's important for us to be conscious about the sort of waste we accumulate, especially when it's electronic, because this sort of waste has like brings a whole host of problems with it. You got the environmental issues presented by land pollution, air pollution, maritime, water pollution, and along with that, you're seeing just several social issues like child exploitation, for example, or insufficient equipment and infrastructure provided to those directly dealing with waste. And so I think it's an extremely pertinent subset of waste that's exponentially growing, and I hope that we, as a participant of this ecosystem, are able to raise those concerns and really bring some more voice to this oft ignored subset of waste management.
That's all really great you're talking about. But something I've been thinking about is that, I mean, I hold an iPhone 11 in my hand, and I'm thinking that I can basically do whatever I want with this in the modern age. I can shoot a video. I can go on social media. I can talk to my friends. Blah blah blah. Do I really need an iPhone 11, an iPhone 12, an iPhone 24? So I just want to talk to you about that. So I mean, in that sense, do we as society actually need any more things? I feel that we'll be all right if they keep producing only iPhone 11s in the coming generations. But
Right.
there's this whole thing. There's this whole thing about we as human beings, and we really like something that's materialistic, because that's kind of embedded in our evolution cycle. So I feel that is an inherent part of society as well. So is there a way we can tackle both these issues together?
And so see, prudence is one part. One aspect of it is to argue what you're saying, that do we really need that next thing, right? I mean, if it contributes in such a negligible manner to my convenience and my ability to work, why bother? Honestly, I'm not from that school of thought. I think the entire point of, let's say, something like social entrepreneurship is to say, be greedy. Be greedy. It's fine to be greedy as long as you're able to channel that greed to do good, right? And what I think is an example I gave at the union this term was if man looked at the wheel and said, why bother making this better? It's fine if it's unevenly shaped, it does its job. Then we probably wouldn't be sitting in air conditioned rooms with lighting, because the attitude to innovation would be like, oh, who cares? It's negligible. But negligible micro are the foundation of the technology we have today. So I don't think disincentivizing innovation is the way to go. But what's more important is for us to create those channels with which greed can turn into good. And for example, in e-waste itself, you have this entire concept of the circular economy, which is that you're reducing the impact you have on the environment by collecting electronics that have already been used or would be otherwise obsolete, and then recycling them or reusing them or refurbishing them, but somehow ensuring that it gets out. And that's a big part of this entire argument, that we can channel green with good. But there are tons of solutions out there. I think social entrepreneurship is a rapidly growing ecosystem for precisely this reason, because man refuses to stop being greedy, which I think is completely right. But at the same time, we need to find solutions to be good. Otherwise, the rate at which we are polluting and wasting is just awful and real.
No, actually, I didn't actually consider that perspective. That's actually quite the obvious perspective to be sure here. But actually, I wanted to talk to you about. So you said you mainly focus on e-waste currently. Are you planning on expanding your operations into different sectors? Maybe I understand that another big manifesto of your organization is having everything youth led, student led, and having them taking responsibility. So if you could just expand on that point, and maybe in the coming years, would you be open to having more aspects in your operations rather?
Sure. So I'll divide that into two questions. First of all, is e-waste what we're going to continue working on? The short answer is yes, because the thing is, even if e-waste is a very small niche in the entire world or the realm of waste management, it is still enormous. And more than it being enormous right now, the bigger issue is that it's just not catered to sufficiently. You see too much e-waste not flowing through the official channels or just not being catered to efficiently. And honestly, it will take multiple lifetimes for a single individual to just tackle that. So instead of branching out and focusing on too many things inefficiently, I would much rather streamline all operations to ensure we can efficiently work on on a niche subset where we know that a lot of work needs to happen in the future. And in terms of it being youth-led, well, the fact of the matter is that the youth are often ignored. And while I still feel like there is a certain pedestal and platform after you graduate, or maybe even in the final years of uni, as a high school student, you're really not taken seriously. And I've faced that myself, right? You're not often taken seriously. And the idea, therefore, is to provide a platform for the passionate and talented who want to make a difference, who can make a difference, and are just seeking a platform for the same. And I think that's why Reuse is definitely a social enterprise. But more than thinking of it as any corporate entity, I look at it as a platform for the youth, a platform with which they can tackle any facet of electronic waste management or social entrepreneurship through us. I think that's what our role is.
This aspect of, I think we've discussed this in person as well, that you said that it was initially a little tough for you to actually get in to these offices and just put your ideas across. So this is more towards the younger people coming up and who may want to set up organizations of their own. What would you say? What advice would you give them of how to go about things, basically? Because I understand it becomes slightly easier at university. I'm not saying things just become just better in that sense, but what would you say to people who are currently in grades 11, 12, or even university, of how they can maybe start their organization?
Well, okay, so again, so for high school students, right, the story is it doesn't matter if your organization is a colossal failure, right? Because the experience you will get when you directly face all of the hurdles that go with making an organization at such a young age, especially if you master that, then when you try to start something in university, you will be so much more familiar with everything that could potentially go wrong, everything you need to focus on, and just how to go about doing different things. So I think experience is one thing that's super important, and the second undeniably important part is your network. If you can connect to like 1,000 young talented individuals at high school, even if you maintain touch just with 10% of those students, will individuals who are like really experienced or talented professionals 20 to 30 years down the line. So I don't think starting an organization is ever wrong, especially even if you're in high school, especially even if you're facing all sorts of issues and it's just so difficult to kickstart anything. Just go for it. Just hustle. Worst comes to worst, you'll have to shut it down in 3 months, and people might you know, maybe even they might even mock you, like worst case. But who cares? Like honestly, who cares? And at the end of the day, that effort is going to culminate into a much better network for you and much more experience that will eventually be valuable for you. And in terms of university students getting involved, I think most universities today have so much infrastructure out there that you can literally do anything you want to do. Like I'm at a point where I can't fathom providing some universities more than what they already have. Like nothing in our vast ecosystem that REUSE has provides something new to most universities because there's already so much opportunity in these places. So I think if you're at uni, you definitely have the means to do something and go ahead with it.
I mean, we spoke about, so how I actually look at things are that if you are starting off an organization, however old you are bound to make mistakes. And the younger you start an organization, the earlier you come across those mistakes. So eventually later down in life, you'll be able to tackle them more efficiently because you'll already have gone through that phase, if that makes sense.
Right.
Moreover, so this was more about like starting off your organization, but now I kind of want to talk about how you expanded your network. So you talked about networking and getting to know other youthful individuals in the sector, but how'd you take your operations overseas basically and try to cover the whole world?
Okay, so first of all, there's actually something I forgot to say about the previous question, and I'd like to just add that briefly. While, again, I think it's absolutely clear that you should strive to start something of your own at an early age, like if you can. What I'd also like to say is that if the work you're doing is something that is going to stick with you, let's say you're creating a platform for digital content and you're producing things that go onto the internet, be careful. Like, I'm not saying don't do it, but the things you say will stick with you. And you don't want to end up having something extremely controversial or extremely stupid in your past that could adversely affect your future, right? Because that's just absolutely not worth it. So I just want to give that warning for students out there because it's not worth jeopardizing your future potentially, because even if you might want to be an entrepreneur today, 10 years down the line when you're much smarter and much more experienced than you are today, you might realize that entrepreneurship is just not cut out for you. And when then the professional ecosystem closes their doors on you because of your past, it's just not the best situation to be in. So anyway, that's what I
Yeah, I mean,
now.
I kind of do. Sorry to, but I just wanted to add a tangent to that. I kind of do agree to that. Actually, I feel that mediums like this can be good for creators. I feel someone who want to go into the creative space where you'd have probably less of an interaction with corporate sectors. But yeah, exactly. If you are in the political limelight or if you are dealing with corporates, I feel that this does have a negative impact on your profile as a whole, because at university as well, they do care a lot about your image and what you have on your social media. However silly that might sound, they actually do go through your profiles. So yeah, that does make sense. And if anyone is watching and they are getting their name out there, just make sure that you aren't putting something that you don't want to be associated with. Yeah, you wanted to add something.
So the thing is, there were two ways that we sort of kicked things off outside. I think in today's globalized era, for law students, something you definitely leverage, which is the fact that at least someone
Rishit,
in your network, your friend circle.
Could you just repeat your point? I think
Sorry?
Could you just repeat your point? I think there was a cutoff in the connection.
Yeah, no worries. So, what was I saying? Yeah, so I think this is something most students can, leverage, which is that in today's globalized day, you're bound to have at least one friend out there who's at least associated with another country, right? Or if you don't have that, at least let that be your first priority, because the larger your network, the better it is. So do ensure you have an international network. But the second you do know someone, you can often advertise your opportunities quite specifically to students who will be interested via them. So that's one of the first ways, and especially in the initial years, that's how I kicked it off. But I think there's no shortage of opportunities when it comes to networking with people outside, because of course you've got your platforms like LinkedIn, but each university has 50 to 100 student associations, of which at least 2 or 3 would have something to do with what you have in mind. Similarly, most high schools have clubs and societies. So if you have an incredible opportunity that you know schools will be interested in, it's just a matter of reaching out and contacting the official mail of the school, letting them know of your opportunity and going ahead from there. I mean, like, I'm not saying that it's going to be super successful. Like, odds are if you put 100 mails out there, like 2 will reply. But it's a start. And at the end of the day, if by just sending 100 mails, which takes like 2 hours max tops, maybe 3 hours, 4 hours, I don't know, less than a day for sure. If you can expand to 2 different countries in one day, then that's still extremely efficient. So it's just about hustling, I guess.
Yeah. So, what are you looking for in the future? What do you see for Reuse in the future? Operations wise, in terms of projects, things like that.
Well, what we've really been working towards is trying to provide. So, up until now, we had a regional structure because I myself was a high school student and my network obviously was not extended to a lot of universities. And typically, I feel like there is a sort of glass ceiling in terms of high school students formalizing partnerships with university student associations. I don't know, maybe it's not universal, maybe it's something I felt, but regardless. But now that I've come into uni, I think it's far easier for me to get in touch with student associations quite directly, which is why I'm trying to change it to a university-based sort of unit structure. And so the idea is getting that transition right and then just rapidly expanding as quickly as we can, because there are thousands of universities out there. And if you have like thousands of university partners, your organization is bound to be enormous. So that's the objective.
What about on the government side of things? Because I understand that you are in contact with some state bodies here in India as well. So what are you looking in that perspective?
So the thing is, right, if you want to work with the government, you need to have a very clear, crystal clear idea about what it is you want to achieve and how you want to achieve it. Now, in terms of those things, I genuinely don't think that at this point it's the best use of our time and resources, because there are a lot of other things that we're actively working on and actively making a difference in. But obviously, I don't mind working with governments at all. In fact, it would be an honor to work with them. It's just that I don't want to waste a government official's time with a proposal that doesn't make sense or has a bunch of holes in them. And until I have a good idea of what it is I want to achieve, I'm not going to reach out to them. Like, one example of something that can be implemented at a government level, for example, is the sort of provision or facilitation of better recycling infrastructure for e-waste, right? Or alternatively, providing incentives for the private sector to get into e-waste recycling. But you really need to keep a lot of variables in mind in terms of how you expect that transition to happen and why the government should even be involved in the first place. I mean, you're seeing, especially in India in recent years, the private e-waste recycling sector grow quite rapidly. You see a lot of big players come into the recycling bit. So why not leave them to go on with it and see how it grows in another 3 to 4 years? Why bother getting involved at all and putting the taxpayers' money onto it? So, like I said, you need to have a very clear argument to proceed.
Right, I understand that there may be hesitations to getting to work with the government. Obviously, if it does happen, that's a great honor for anybody. But I just want to like get your remarks on this particular question, and this has been something I've been thinking about. So it's that if you want to create a change in society, some people think that you have to be a part of a government structure, a parliament. But some people think that you can create a change for society from the outside as well, from things like your work or things people are doing in the education sector, in the healthcare sector. So do you have any kind of thoughts around this question?
Wait, so what you're asking essentially is that can you make a difference without being a part of parliament or the government?
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you have the private sector, or at least the non-government participants in the economy and in the nation in general, doing so much work. I think it would, in fact, it would be quite insulting for me to say that if you're not the government, you've done nothing for the country. I think there are a lot of incredible people with incredible organizations who are doing a ton of stuff. And eventually, in fact, the government has even recognized individuals like this. In fact, I have an acquaintance who was recently awarded by the PM himself for one of his initiatives. So you can definitely make an enormous difference.
Right. I mean, I kind of want to focus on the economic side of things now because I know that's an interest of yours as well. So how do you see this whole coronavirus pandemic and how it's going to affect the economy? I mean, I hear a lot of economists talk about economies going into deep recessions or even depressions to that point of time, and even how they're going to have to be totally rebuilt from ground level. So I'd just like to know what your thoughts are on that.
Again, I think this is contentious, and I feel like it's one of those things where you can't really provide a prediction. I mean, it's you don't even have a timeline for when the vaccine's coming out. You don't have a proper timeline for when nations are even going to be able to take control of their nations without a lockdown. So for any sort of economic commentary to come out of that, which is an optimistic commentary especially, is just very hard to do. Now, when it comes to what a lot of economists have to say, like on paper in media, the fact of the matter is apocalyptic, articles always fare the best. They're always going to get the best clicks. And so I think even the media often has an incentive to push those sort of messages out. But it's just safe to have a pessimistic view, because being optimistic means you have some sort of certainty about when this will end, which nobody has.
Right. I mean, so I was reading this research paper that came out of MIT recently. So they talk about how this is something that society will actually have to get used to now. They were talking about something called intermittent lockdowns. So we'd be going into work for 2 months at a time, and then having to shut down for a month or so. So that was something that was pretty interesting in my eyes, at least. And I just like to know how that affect you as reuse, and even wider society. I mean, how what do you make of that particular thing? Have you come across this paper?
Okay, so again, these are MIT academics, probably the finest in the world, and I haven't come across it, so I'll probably have to read it to make a proper judgment. But I would say, I mean, possibly from an idealistic standpoint, one would hope to see lockdowns. I mean, you see a lot of benefits to the environment, a lot of security against epidemics like these. But practically speaking, I don't know how I would see that happen. I mean, we live in a point where still there are some nations that show resistance to having a lockdown. In some countries, you have governments who want the lockdown, but people wanting, the governments to stop the lockdown, and you have celebrities, influencers, some very bright people protesting the lockdown. So, practically speaking, I don't know how that would make a lot of sense. But in terms of how it would affect us, I think if there's one really positive outcome that's come out of the coronavirus, it is the digitization of a lot of functions. The concept of video conferencing has become normal, absolutely. And not only for very high level executive business meetings, but even if it means a kindergarten, classroom, it's there. And the fact that there's this access to infrastructure, this ability to continue working as normal, even without having to step out of the house, is definitely something that has allowed an organization like ours, for example, to at least keep on working on some things, if not others. Like, obviously, we can't work on collection drives right now. I am in no position to risk anybody's health and security for, even if it's for a noble cause like e-waste management. But having said that, we are working a lot in trying to expand our social program online in working on awareness, which can be sort of brought out through a variety of digital ways. So yeah, we've lost out on a few things, but we're definitely improving in others.
Was this whole concept of where am I going with this? So we've seen different economies take a different approach to how things are being handled in that particular thing. But so I was reading this somewhere that the Trump administration, and obviously people obviously differ in terms of their opinions about this, but they had a pandemic department in their government, but then that was removed much earlier. So do you think that obviously no one could have anticipated something like something so global like this, but you really feel that a country like the USA didn't have any kind of resources that they had put behind? Because I was reading this somewhere else as well. Sorry for going off and being so disjointed with this question, but I think this is the first time when the world is being struck by something so massive, and the USA isn't one of the isn't one of the front steppers. They aren't one of the people who are actually leading the conversation of how things should be handled right now. So is that just a comment on the Trump administration, or is it more of how the US government is structured?
Okay, so first of all, with regard to the last thing you said, which is this omnipresence of the US and being at the forefront, I think that's more marketing than it is reality, because there have definitely been a lot of very significant things over the last century that have not been led by the US, and in which USA was either involved very late or to a very limited extent. Um, but I do get that argument to some extent. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist and argue for what really happened in terms of detecting the virus. You have some claim that WHO knew about it well in advance, but they didn't want to say anything because of China. I mean,
Yeah.
there are all sorts of theories going on, and I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist and put my tinfoil hat on and pay credits to any of these, right? There are a billion things that could have happened, but innocent until proven guilty, right? Like, if you don't have solid facts to prove what you're saying, then you can't make decisions on the basis of that. I would hope, at least, that for the future we do have the infrastructure to detect such crises. But I don't know. It's unfortunate. Maybe it's just luck, bad luck. But I don't know.
I don't know. You probably don't want to comment on the conspiracy theories, but I find them fascinating, man. The fact that the WHO aren't willing to comment on the Taiwan situation, and things like that. And things such as the bio, the protein, what do you call it? The protein chromosomes found in the bats, which are being studied in the Wuhan research facilities, were only 5 kilometers away from where the virus was detected, and they matched the bats that were there. So these are kind of eye openers for me, and obviously, living in today's day and age, it's difficult for me to trust any media source that comes out, because there's obviously you have to look at it with rose-tinted glasses, because it does contain some kind of agenda, but some of them are just too revealing in my eyes. Another thing about China was that so I've been reading a lot about China and how they've installed COVID trackers for families who they have a suspicion towards of having coronavirus. So what are your remarks on that? And do you think that, okay, people in the I've heard many comments by the USA saying that some of the citizens actually saying that could actually be one of the more positive things, that if you install cameras or if you install some kind of software on an individual's phone, that'd be beneficial for society in protecting how many people die. But I feel that if you do take those measures, they could easily say that no, we need that data for, let's say, another virus that may be infiltrated in the years to come, and they just may misuse that kind of data. What do you make of that? Because I feel that data is probably the most precious thing out there in today's day and age, isn't it?
So just to confirm, you said that the USA, like people in the US, were in support of these kind of
Some
trackers.
Okay, so obviously it's obviously a very controversial topic, so it's kind of 50-50. So some people are actually saying that reverting to a tracking system like in China could actually be beneficial in terms of saving people's lives. But others are like, okay, maybe, but we how can we just give away our data for them to use it in years to come?
Right. Okay. So this is my opinion on it. I would say this is a very fundamental left versus right thing, right? The West has typically been your left, which is more respect our freedoms, respect our privacy, respect our rights, And the right has been, like the government is important. It's an institution that at the end of the day is central to everything. And it is important for everyone's security and safety and the efficiency of the nation that the government is involved in most things. I don't want to comment on one side because it's relative, right?
Yeah.
What is good, what is bad? How can I objectively put that into terms? And I don't think I've thought enough about this particular thing in particular to have a judgment about what is the correct extent of data, sharing or government's access to our data, right? But what I will say is that I don't see this happening in the US at all. Because if you're seeing protests against the lockdown itself on the grounds that that's a violation of rights, then I cannot fathom people agreeing to trackers and that transition happening slowly. So that's what I have to say about that. And in terms of the first part of what you've spoken about, which is the entire notion of China and WHO and Taiwan and everything. Thing is, I don't want to say that there's zero possibility that any of this could ever happen, right? Like, I mean, it couldn't. It's probably manipulated to some extent, but maybe it isn't, right? Who am I to say anything? But what this does pay a lot of heed to is the fact that there are some inherent deficiencies in our international governance, right? And this is something I've researched on quite extensively. So I think this is a safe zone for me to put out my opinions. But what I think is, in the way international governments are structured today, is that there is this inherent paradox where they attempt to be democratic, but for their very existence to continue, they need to give asymmetric perks to bigger nations, which is inherently non-democratic. And what I mean by that is, for example, in the UN, you claim to be a democratic institution, but you don't refrain from giving veto powers to larger nations. And obviously the purpose of that veto is to ensure these nations stay within the realm of their institution, and as a result of that, the UN itself, for example, stays relevant. But that's definitely just not right. Like, you can't claim to be democratic but be founded with principles that are inherently non-democratic. And the sort of situation we have here, again, the doubt with WHO and China, that itself is bad. I mean, of course, there's the entire avenue that the WHO is actually doing these awful things, but the fact that we have to doubt an institution like that and think that they might be willing to put global health and security at risk to please a player, that itself shows that something is going wrong. That should not happen. We shouldn't even be doubting these institutions. And I know that's a far-fetched claim because this is obviously a very important dilemma. This is something policymakers, I'm sure, have been thinking about for decades. But at the end of the day, the UN itself is a very young organization in the history of society. So maybe we haven't cracked what's perfect, and maybe it's important for the brightest minds, brightest academics, the brightest policymakers to come out with a structure that ensures that these sort of deficiencies aren't as prominent.
Another kind of sub question I wanted to raise was that so I heard this journalist, I think her name is Melissa Chen, so she's kind of famous in the American circuit and the Singapore circuit as well. She spent her time in China as well and in the USA, and she says that she feels that China can compete with the USA in anything when it comes to manufacturing, industrial work, anything in that sort. But where they're actually lagging behind is innovation, because they feel that when you actually have a government that's actually going through every single thing that an individual is doing in the country, it becomes awfully difficult for any individual to come out with any kind of spark that would lead to innovation or things like that. And she pointed out that why the Americas are still so great, and why every bright young mind wants to go there for their education and just settle up there, is that because there is some sort of freedom of speech there, and she feels that until and unless that's there, it's going to be difficult for China to compete with them in that standpoint. So do you think that will China become more liberal? If that's probably very difficult for me to say in a sentence, but do you think that they probably will have to take those measures to compete with the USA? Or what do you think on that particular topic?
Okay, so I'll divide this into two parts. The first is, can China compete with the US? The second is, can China continue to innovate, right? Can China compete with the US? I think absolutely. I think undoubtedly. I think underestimating China would be a ridiculous sort of stance to take, because I think more than the colossal giant that China itself already is, what's as important is their foothold geopolitically. I think what their foothold in a lot of nations outside of China is just enormous. I think their, for example, role in Africa,
Yeah.
the things they do with One Belt, One Road were,
South China
I
Sea.
mean, some call it devious, but I think it's nothing short of genius in terms of being able to expand your geopolitical foothold. And the subtlety of it is what's incredible, because you saw things like, you saw these agreements that were, I mean, can be described as malicious under the farce of debt traps. I mean, under the farce of, well, they were debt traps, but under the farce of it being just credit given to partners. And the subtlety with which they've expanded their geopolitical foothold in just maybe the last decade or so is, I think, far more significant than the strides, let's say, the US has made, which I would argue is quite the opposite under the Trump administration, where a lot of countries are not on as friendly, terms with the US. You see even Europe openly dispute American policy in the international arena, and I think that's a big loss. You can't quantify it, but it's definitely a big loss, and that's why I think China's just being quite smart about the way they're dealing with stuff like this. So I think they can definitely compete. Now, the second argument, which is the innovation part. Thing is, if you look at the titans of innovation, I would argue there's still, I mean, Japan is still up there. Japan is still one of the most prominent nations in terms of innovations, and they weren't founded on the principles of free speech and this marketed American dream that USA does so well at upholding, right? They're very different cultures in which innovation is led and brought forward, but I wouldn't say one is better than the other necessarily, because if you saw the way Japan was brought up, it was, you saw what was known as keiretsu or zaibatsus, but the idea was to maintain corporate almost oligarchies, or these titans that would have so much power and so much capital that they could drive innovation far more efficiently. They could make investments and drive efficiency far better than a lot of other institutions could without those sort of economies of scale. And I think Japan has proven that that model works too. And I don't see why, if China tries to emulate that with very strong corporate titans, why, that's not feasible too. So, yeah.
Something I'd like to unpick here is that, so you spoke about the geopolitical situation and how China are trying to basically increase their footprint around the world. My only qualm is I feel that some of these African countries aren't getting their side of the argument towards it, and that's why I feel that I really wanted Tulsi Gabbard, who was a presidential candidate in the US, and Bernie Sanders to actually do well. Unfortunately, they weren't able to, but I felt that they were two strong candidates because they felt that the US was involving themselves too much in matters outside of the US. Okay, I totally understand that the move by Donald Trump of him pulling out of the Syrian crisis was probably a bad one, because it should have been more informed in that situation. But I still feel that of the matters of them keeping things in-house was more stronger than going about to other countries. I understand that as a power, for a country to be power hungry, that's probably a good way to take. But I feel that understanding the point of view of these African countries, or even Arunachal, which was a contentious point in India as well. I feel that's something that a country like China shouldn't be involving themselves in.
Okay, so I'm from literally the opposite school of thought, because I think there is nothing more important to sustainable economic and political growth than taking initiative internationally. And a very simple example I will give is the USA. What brought them into prominence back when UK was considered the global hegemon? It was taking international initiative in the face of adversity during the world wars, even in the middle, when it meant that they were even giving loans to the Soviet Union in the middle, but ensuring that they had a reach even there, that they weren't necessarily picking sides until the very end where they had to. And even after the world wars were over, it was precisely their sort of policing and this sort of taking over this global policeman role that is what led to them toppling Britain eventually in the 50s when you saw the entire Suez crisis happen. That was when USA sort of put their feet down and was like, this is what we stand for. We believe in peace. We don't want, XYZ to happen. And we're going to ensure peace. Even if that was arguably a farce for whatever malicious intent, again, you could be a conspiracy theorist or you could have different opinions on this as to why USA did what they did. But at the end of the day, taking initiative internationally is what made them the global power they are today. If during the world wars, if in the middle, if after, they were like, you know what, I don't care what happens in Europe, I'm doing well, I just care about what I'm doing, I'll just sell them a few goods here and there and I'm fine. I don't imagine them being as important as they are today.
It was a great pleasure having you on the podcast. Anything you'd like to plug? Any final words you'd like for the viewers to hear? The floor is yours.
Okay, well, I guess I'll plug it because I am going to launch a second venture in less than a week. But it's called Unicast Entertainment. We're creating a digital entertainment company that is working to provide industry insights into chefs to consultants, bakers to bankers, basically all sorts of individuals across the professional spectrum. And we intend to launch a web series in around a week. And well, yeah, I just hope to see a lot of people look into that and hopefully enjoy the content.
Oh, that sounds certainly really amazing. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'll be gripped onto that, but the viewers on the channel as well, I'm pretty sure that anything that comes out of Rishit's way, it's generally good quality. So I'm pretty sure they can look forward to that. Anyways, thanks for having you on thanks for being on my podcast. I'd love to have you at some later point as well when we can maybe sit down face to face and have a conversation. But this was great as well. I mean, thanks for coming on.
Yes. Thank you for this opportunity. All right, see you.
Bye.
Bye.